I wondered if before we introduce ourselves, if I might just acknowledge our local board members that are here that sit on the Manukau Harbour Forum. So I've got the chair of the forum, Jill Naismith, Bridget Graham from Mangakiki Tamaki, and David Hone from Hoki Tāpapa.
Welcome to you, and thanks for coming up and coming in here today. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. I'm really pleased to present this Manukau Harbour update report with our team. I've got a small presentation to guide your consideration of this item, and I'll just give you a quick reminder while we're here. Under the LTP, you passed some resolutions relating to the Manukau Harbour, and those are referenced for you on page 52 of your report. Those resolutions were your response to community advocacy under the LTP for the Manukau Harbour, and feedback received from Mana Whenua and the Manukau Harbour Forum specifically. The Manukau Harbour Forum specific advocacy points related to hydrodynamic modelling. So since the adoption of those resolutions, we've had a cross-council team of staff, and we've been looking at giving effect to them and issues and opportunities for the Manukau. Some of the team is present here today, and they'll be supporting us in this presentation, and I'll get them to introduce themselves.
I'm Jenny Fuller. I'm team leader of the Biodiversity and Coastal Strategy team in the Auckland Plan Strategy and Research Department.
Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jared Walker. I'm a marine scientist in the Research Investigations and Monitoring Unit.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Emma, a relationship advisor in infrastructure and environmental services.
Welcome.
As you'll see in the report, we've got 3 recommendations for your consideration. And the first one is around endorsing the Manukau Harbour Work Programme, which Emma will take us through. The second one is around noting the regional funding we've allocated to properly look at and scope the feasibility of hydrodynamic modelling. And the third is around that the options, including any funding for that modelling, will be brought back to both the Manukau Harbour Forum and this committee. Just to give a bit of context on the Manukau, as you'll be well aware, the Manukau Harbour is a really significant cultural value to a number of hapu and iwi within Tamaki Makaurau. It's also quite highly valued by the communities which make up the 9 local boards which border the Manukau, and those boards are represented in pink on that map there. That map also gives you a good indication of the scale of the harbour and some of the issues that we might need to consider around water quality within it. This report you've got here is specifically being discussed and developed with input from the Manukau Harbour Forum, and who have a main objective to raise the profile of Manukau Harbour as a significant cultural, ecological and economic asset. Those boards have also committed OPEX funding to support delivery of that objective over the last couple of years. I'd also like to draw your attention to Jill Naismith's letter, which is an attachment to this report, and those local board members here today. And I'll just pass over to Emma to take us through the work programme.
So good morning again. This is just in reference to the attachment beginning on page 59, which is a spreadsheet showing all the activity relevant to the Manukau Harbour. So the point of putting together this work programme was really just to show the Manukau Harbour Forum and this committee the breadth of activity that supports the Manukau Harbour, and in particular the forum's, what's encapsulated in the forum's vision around the social, economic, cultural well-being of the harbour. So this is how we've put together the work programme. The key thing to note is that it's not an integrated work programme. The reason being is that the projects included in the work programme were developed as part of other council work programmes. An integrated programme for the harbour would have been developed as part of a strategic plan for the harbour, which we don't have. So this, just to take note, this is a really comprehensive list of activity relevant to the harbour. There are some gaps, things around historic heritage that is not included, but we intend this to be a working document that will be updated over time when new projects happen and other projects are completed.
Okay.
Apologies for the incompetence with the stick. I'm just going to talk briefly to the part of the report that talks about the future work program. Basically, the items that are set out in the current work program, many of those will continue, so they will be part of the future work program. And we do hope and intend that there is greater integration around these sort of programs, both from officers talking to each other and working more closely with the Manukau Harbour Forum as a cross-council integrated team. And it's also worth noting that many of these programs are quite long-term, and there's significant local board support for these projects. Many of them are in fact funded by the local boards or who put significant money into them. What we're doing at the moment is, as outlined in the report, we are looking at an action plan that was developed in 1990 and doing an analysis of what's been done and what hasn't been done in relation to that. And that will give us some clues about what are some of the gaps in the current understanding of the Manukau. And of course, Waiora Waimari is going to be quite an important interface with the whole of the Manukau. That program will be looking at different catchments around the region in relation to the requirements of the NPS freshwater, and the Manukau, of course, is going to feature in that as well. And will likely, although it's not fully determined, be one of the areas that is looked at in the first instance, one of the earlier areas. And of course, the treaty settlement is going to be extremely relevant. That's coming along in the Manukau, and there's going to be lots of things happening with mana whenua and governance and co-management and all those sort of issues, so they clearly need to be taken into account with the future work as well. And I guess the final point is probably the one that maybe gives a clue as to why we don't have a strategic plan. We really don't have any funding for this at the moment, so what we're doing is looking at using existing budgets. So the work that's been done in relation to, for example, the review of the 1990 action plan, that's been done by staff. There's no specific budget in relation to that, so any desire to develop a more strategic approach from the governing body, from staff at the governing body level, will require some funding or reprioritisation of existing funding. But I think the first point is very, very, very real. We are looking at being a much more integrated cross-council working party on this now, and we feel that we've already made some quite good progress on that in terms of how we've pulled the program together and how we're working with the forum.
Hello.
Thank you.
So in terms of the resolution in regards to hydrodynamic modelling, the impetus behind the modelling is to essentially identify where sediment accumulates in the harbour. This is quite important as we undertake modelling in other areas, we're learning that all the sediment doesn't end up in one area. There is interactions, connectivity in the marine environment, so the model can really help us understand how those connectivity and those processes work in the harbour. Currently there's a suite of models that are quite old now. Watercare has undertaken modelling associated with their activities. There's been modelling undertaken by NIWA and other research institutes, but some of these models are quite old now, so we need to look at how relevant those models are in today's environment. Also, those models were designed to look at various inputs, so different types of contaminants, sediments, heavy metals, etc., and they were designed for specific issues associated with activities in the harbour. So we need to look at the purpose of this model and also look at the scope of the entire exercise. We also want to take a data review of looking at what models are available and whether they are applicable today, and if not, how can we redesign or develop those models to deliver the aspirations that everyone has for the Manukau Harbour. Currently we've sourced funding to undertake stage 1, which is a data review and also scoping of that model. So as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of information out there, but we need to determine its applicability today and whether the quality of the data is relevant to describe today's issues, but also the spatial extent across the harbour. There may be some areas that may be well described, some areas not so well described. So it's determining how much data, the quality of that data is to inform the further development of the whole of harbour hydrodynamic model. And then in subsequent years, that's where we'll be looking at undertaking field sampling or further data collection where we need to, but also in the final stages we'll be actually developing the model itself, but also there's a section of a model that needs to be developed, and that's in regards to sediment transport, and that model will tell us where sediment's coming from, where it deposited, but also not only sediment can be described, but also contaminants such as heavy metals, which are another issue for the harbour.
Thanks, Jared. Just in terms of next steps, as Jared was describing, we're committed to that scoping and feasibility study, and we're hopeful to get a progress report on that to both the forum and yourselves in March next year. And in parallel, as Jenny described, we're reviewing the 1990 action plan and looking at a deadline of the end of this calendar year, and to provide a summary report of those review outcomes. As I think three of us have said, based on the findings of the hydrodynamic scoping study, we'll then have to look to identify future funding sources for the model's delivery, and that will require reprioritisation of budgets. I guess in conclusion, the progress to date is quite reflective of the collaborative cross-council team we've been working together on, and I'd really like to acknowledge the effort of those people. And that's the end of our presentation, Mr Chairman, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you. Got questions from Councillor Crum?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Are you taking some comments as well as questions, or just
Well,
purely questions?
No, we'll have some questions first, okay?
Okay.
And then, because we...
In that case,
and then we'll go... Yeah, you can move the motion once...
Yep, will do. My question, which I was going to insert into comments, but let's have a question. How did you come about the funding to scope the possibility of hydrodynamic modelling?
Really good question through the Chair. We put a proposal to some of the 4 units which are in the cross-council team, and we've got $5,000 contribution each from Stormwater, Environmental Services, Natural Strategy and Policy, and Research and Evaluations.
So very much a demonstration of the collaborative reference. Thank you.
Councillor Casey?
Yeah, it's a budget line question. The line reads, Waikofi Remedial Works. There's a question mark under budget. I wondered why.
I'll pass you over to Emma to answer that one.
Through the chair, that's that work around the Waikofi remediation, and I hadn't had a budget figure by the time the report was put together, but I can certainly find out what the new budget figure is for that work and let you know.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, do you have a question?
No, just a statement rather than a question.
I'll wait till we put the motion in.
I have one more
Councillor Wayne Walker?
Sure.
Question?
Yeah, got a few questions. Sounds like you're really looking at this hydrodynamic modelling.
Can you ask the question, please, Councillor
I'm
Walker?
just.
No,
it
you
is-
seem to, you get into preamble when you're asking a question.
Sometimes it's nice to give a compliment, Mr. Chair.
Well-
Anyway, can I just continue?
No, ask the question, please.
Well, why don't I just give it a miss,
But-
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, if you don't want to ask a question, but I just saying, ask a question. You make a statement, and that kind of rankles with other people, because if everybody does that, it just puts the meeting into disarray, I think. So if you ask the question, and I've said to Councillor Crum, we'll then move a motion, and then we can make comments, okay? So
You
asked
finished,
your
Mr. Chair.
You asked your question.
Around the hydrodynamic modelling, will the modelling that you're doing be applicable to other areas? So are you generating templates and the like that might apply to Waitemata and other locations around Auckland?
Good question, Wayne.
So, through the Chair, to answer your question, Councillor Walker, there is currently a hydrodynamic model for the Central Waitemata Harbour. I've just finished doing a hydrodynamic model exercise for the Upper Waitemata as well. Also, we have undertaken hydrodynamic modelling for the Kaipara Harbour, and I understand there is a hydrodynamic model for the Hauraki Gulf, which has been contributed to by Waikato Regional Council and Niwa, and I think it was the Auckland Regional Council. So the Manukau Harbour is really probably the last area to have a whole of harbour approach in terms of hydrodynamic modelling. So specifically to answer your question, the template we don't need, but there will be synergies amongst the different harbours because we have the information and the modelling at hand.
Okay. The other question I've got, just around your modelling, is the work that you're doing ongoing in the sense that you can have data collection points for picking up sedimentation on an ongoing basis, so it's not just a study at one point in time, but it's dynamic.
So the value that a hydrodynamic model brings is being able to keep it alive over time. So it won't, not only will it let us assess where sediment is coming from and other contaminants are washing off the land and ending up in the harbour. You can start scenario testing, looking at if you start changing from one land use to another, you can then start making predictions on what those changes in loads of sediments and contaminants may be. So, as you all know, Auckland is facing development in certain areas. We can start testing the development scenarios around changes in land use. Also, your comment around monitoring